I'm Robin Murphy with the Center for Robot-Assisted Search and Rescue, and welcome to the Disasters in Donut podcast, where you can learn about disaster robotics and the time it takes to have a cup of coffee and savor a donut. This episode is an overview of the best practices for small unmanned aerial systems in flooding. Justin Adams, David Merrick, and I have put this together based on our deployments starting with Hurricane Katrina back in 2005 and most recently Hurricane Harvey, where we set a record number of flights for a public safety agency, in this case 112 flights for Fort Bend County Office of Emergency Management, and fulfilled every request for unmanned aerial systems through their incident command system. And that was the third event we've flown with them, so they knew what to ask for. But enough of that. Let's get to the best practices. The PDF of this is available at crazart.org. When you think about small unmanned aerial systems, don't think about them just as a reaction to the flood, but think about them for before the flood. We have specific recommendations and considerations for you when you think about using unmanned aerial systems. And then once you're thinking about them, think about what your missions are going to be. And then we'll tell you some less frequent missions and methods that we haven't seen really used, but are there as a possibility. And there's much more detailed data that we've put together on why these recommendations and mission frequency are what they are. But let's just go over them real quick. So before the flood, if you have the opportunity, get your digital elevation maps of critical areas before the flooding. And that is a case where using your path planning and photogrammetric software is very handy. As the flooding begins, you should be monitoring the initial flooding, and it's very important to get the flood inundation engineers out to look at that and make sure that it's going according to prediction. There's always some surprise. There may be an ability to mitigate what's going on. Oh, look, this is flooding backed up. Let's fly along the creek. Okay, there's a tree. We need to cut that tree down. That's blocking the stream now and acting as a dam. So those are things that are nice to do. When you as an emergency manager think about using small unmanned aerial systems, one of the things to keep in mind is that these low-cost small unmanned aerial vehicles flying visual line of sight is the way to go. So a DJI Mavic Pro, probably the most handy UAV for these types of things known to man, okay? When you're flying for floods, it turns out for the initial response, you're going to be flying visual line of sight, and they're going to be short duration because we're recommending you have an expert there who can see what they need, and they quickly see what they need to see. We also recommend that you fly visual line of sight because the density of manned air traffic is so high. You've got so many helicopters going so low. It's kind of irresponsible not to keep your bird in line of sight and be able to park it down in the trees if you have to. All right. Send agency experts and social workers with a small unmanned aerial system team. So I know that we always think of unmanned aerial systems as saving manpower and cost, but in this case, the extra manpower is working it. Because even if you can stream the video over the county or agency representative, it's very hard to get that two-way where to look next. And then everybody comes over. They see this UAV up there, and now everybody's asking questions about what's going on. The citizens are that. And also, when I fly, people assume I'm a producer with a TV group and that they get mad at me because they think I'm just trying to benefit from their sorrow. But when they see that we're with a county representative, it's like, oh, right, this is great. My county is keeping up with the times and doing the right things. So there's that. What Fort Bend found out was that, certainly in the first couple of days, is that the neighborhoods will all want to flock on a person. There's a lot of opportunity for the social workers to answer questions and things that a drainage expert wouldn't know how to answer, except say, call this number, which is not particularly satisfying, not usually fulfilling the mission of what you want to do as an emergency manager. So keep that in mind. Notice that we're not looking at pre-programmed flights. They just don't get the right viewpoints for structural inspection. Why is it flooding? Overwatch. The missions that we see are most common. Okay. have the UAS expert, a UAS expert, just sit there, be dedicated to working with the air operations branch. And we've done this in exercises time and time again. The air boss is usually out of the manned aviation, and they're totally unfamiliar with what unmanned systems can do. And if they're familiar, they're with the Predator class, which is not the same as a small Mavic or some of these other platforms. And so getting them in the same place where they can then trade off and then make good decisions about manned or manned assets should be doing what. And there are just a lot of times when the Civil Air Patrol could do a better job for things that require a great deal of coverage. All right, so have a dedicated data management policy and manager. The UAVs are going to create a tremendous amount of data, video, imagery. They have to be labeled. You've got to put them somewhere. The GIS team, there is no GIS team in the world when a disaster happens as part of the emergency management that has extra people and extra time and can suddenly learn how to deal with all of this. Also, when you have groups flying, particularly if you've got volunteers flying, you really need to enforce those chain of custody procedures. Make sure they're very clear on that, and they don't go start posting stuff and violating privacy and things like that. All right. If you want to get a view of a neighborhood, you want that big picture of a neighborhood or a particular area, you might want to just do something like Hangar 360. Fantastic app. It pops it up. The UAV flies straight up, goes rotate, click, 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 and creates a 360 panorama on the web. Now you've got a URL. You don't have to try shipping this ortho mosaic that took hours to put together. It is, half a terabyte big, not that big, but pretty darn big. You're trying to, send these things over email. This makes it a lot easier to get to. It's fast, it's easy, and gives you a wonderful view. All right. Also, just again for emergency managers, just because someone's got a Part 107 doesn't mean they know how to do disaster response. We saw at Harvey, a lot of people had no clue whatsoever about regulations, about what a TFR actually meant. They also didn't know about the privacy laws in Texas, which are different than other states. Every state's different, and you've even got local legislation, right? They weren't very clear on personal safety, and there's some very advanced flight skills that you need when you're flying under these adverse conditions. So moving along, let's talk about the most common missions. The 4 most common missions are, in order of how frequently they actually occur, is you're actually using the UAVs not to get to see if it's flooded. Yeah, we figured that out. Or that people are on a roof. They're calling that in from the cell phone. The bigger question is the inspection and structural inspection. What's the state of the roads? What are the state of bridges? What are the states of levees? What's the water on the side of the road, which is going to prevent the utility crews from restoring the utility because they won't work in water? And what's the critical infrastructure? So that's the number one we see, most frequent. Closely followed in for floods is the debris or damage or flood estimation. The documentation of the causes. Don't expect your UAV, your UAS to be able to tell you for that neighborhood how much water. Have they hit more than 18 inches of water for that? People who have houses, they put trees. They like trees. We like trees. So that just really makes it tough to see what's going on and to really estimate that. But it does really good for documenting land use and the drainage issues, which you can remember for later and go back and get resolved. And if you have lawyers with a developer over that, then it's a picture's worth 10,000 lawyer words. You can also use it for volumetric estimations of the debris after the flood recedes. Again, if you're trying to do the household debris, a little more problematic because of the trees in the way. Strategic situation awareness, reconnaissance survey, the kind of big picture. We found that this time and time again is becoming much more important to be used not to help the responders so much as help the public understand what's going on. And for instance, why is this evacuation order in place? Well, see that here's the water, here's your neighborhood. Yes, your house isn't flooded, but look at that square in the middle of the water. That's the top of a car. Okay, so you're still heavily flooded. You can't get back there. That yellow stuff, that would be the sewage, raw sewage that's floating there. And there, oh look, there's a deer floating, a dead deer in the water. We really don't want you. We don't want you to rescind the evacuation order because you're going to walk through all that muck and you're going to get flesh-eating bacteria. Well, that's way easier to show people, and Fort Bend did that very, very effectively. Another one is tactical situation awareness. So we keep arguing, and I think Dave Merrick's group out of Florida does this really well, is embedding UAVs with the transportation, the USAR teams, any of the field teams, because carrying a very small UAV just to pop straight up and look and see if that road is passable, or maybe, yeah, there's just more trees down that way, but look, there's a game trail or a running path that way. We can just walk in from here. Or hey, it's flooded over here, but the backside of the neighborhood, we can get to that easier. That becomes very, very useful, and we see that as the fourth most common. What we hear a lot is that, oh, it's a flood, we must go do photographic mapping. Actually, the photographic mapping of large areas is most commonly done during the recovery phase, not the immediate life-saving and mitigation response phase. And during the response, the field experts are looking and analyzing in real time. Maps are really hard to put together like that because you've got flowing water, it's interfering with stitching, you're flying, in the morning, at night, you're not doing it at the perfect time, so you got shadows. It's just one thing after the other. And nobody's going to look at the big picture. They're looking at specific things. But later we can show once you hit that recovery phase, then that becomes very, very valuable. And that recovery phase is usually when they've rescinded the evacuation order. So saying I need to get in and violate the evacuation order and put myself at risk and stress out the responders who have to worry about people coming into evacuate area because we're going to get the photogrammetric mapping of the area. No, not so much. Okay, another one is other things you can do. Fort Bend's used it and other groups have used it to identify stranded livestock, really big in an agricultural community. Oversight or spotting for swiftwater rescue as people try to do that. We have seen where in some of the floods people have carried water bottles to trap people on the roof, but do keep in mind this can be very dangerous because unmanned aerial systems usually aren't designed for delivery. If you're doing a Velcro type thing or duct tape, the way that these small UAVs are designed, they work perfectly up until the point when they go out of control. So there's no when you're driving a car and it begins to bounce and shake, and so to slow down. You don't get that feel. So it can be very dangerous, particularly when you're trying to fly next to a person. So just keep that in mind. All right, we have so much more about floods and things that we've learned and can share, and a lot of data to share, more data than you want, and you can look at that on our website. But hopefully this will help you get started as an emergency responder, thinking about what you can do with small unmanned aerial systems for floods.